Okay, today we're going to be looking at indicator 8.5 and 8.6 just to give you a run through about what both of those standards are and those indicators are. For 8.5 is to summarize the key political and economic issues of the last 25 years, including continuing dependence on foreign oil, trade agreements and globalization, health and education reforms, increases in economic disparity and recession, tax policy, the national surplus, debt and deficits, immigration, presidential resignation and impeachment, and the elections of 2000 and 2008. So we'll be dealing mainly in this first part with indicator 8.5. Okay, let's look at the learning objectives for part one. Of course, the first one is explain the events of George Herbert Walker Bush's presidency. Number two is explain the events that caused the Persian Gulf War and how the U.S. responded. Number three, describe the election of 1992. Number four, what were some of the economic and domestic affairs that Bill Clinton dealt with? Number five, explain the contract with America and what was the impact. Number six, explain Clinton's welfare reform. And number seven is describe the scandals of the Clinton presidency and the outcome of them. You'll want to make sure that you answer these questions. These questions you can put at the end of your notes. So make sure that you are paying attention as you're watching the video and you're sort of making mental notes and maybe even jotting down a few things that you might want to say when you go to answer these questions as you get towards the end. Okay, with that, let's get going. Okay, we left off with Ronald Reagan in the last indicator. Now we're going to pick up with George Herbert Walker Bush, who becomes the president after Ronald Reagan in 1990. So after 2 terms as president, Reagan's going to leave office in January of 1989. Bush is his vice president, and he's going to succeed him. And Bush was in office when the Berlin Wall came down and when the Soviet Union finally collapsed in the early 1990s. One thing that Bush is often remembered for is his famous read my lips, no new taxes speech. I'm going to show you a real quick video clip of that you can watch just to give you an idea about how important and how people felt about taxes during that period.
And I'm the one who will not raise taxes. My opponent now says he'll raise them as a last resort or a third resort. But when a politician talks like that, you know that's one resort he'll be checking into. And my opponent won't rule out raising taxes, but I will, and the Congress will push me to raise taxes, and I'll say no. And they'll push, and I'll say no. And they'll push again, and I'll say to them, read my lips. No new taxes.
Once Bush became president, Bush is going to deal with the problem right out of the gate. Bush, of course, being president, is the commander-in-chief over the nation's military. And one of the problems that he's going to face is going to be the Persian Gulf War in 1991. In 1990, Iraq's leader, Saddam Hussein, invaded the neighboring country of Kuwait. Due in part to the reliance on oil from Kuwait and nearby Saudi Arabia, Saddam's actions really concerned the United States. And we were just not buying it that he was not going to, that he was just going to pull out, and he wasn't going to pull out, and we knew he wasn't. So President Bush is going to work through the United Nations to coordinate an alliance of 28 countries that took military action against Iraq after Saddam refused to withdraw back across the Iraqi border. The war lasted only 42 days, and it resulted in the liberation of the country of Kuwait. And again, this was our first attempt really to move into the Middle East, into that part of the world. And of course, George Bush dealt with this, and he had a chance to actually move on into Iraq, but chooses not to, a problem that's going to be left later on for his son, who would become a president later. Bush would run for re-election in 1992, and the presidential election of 1992 was one of the most memorable in history. The Republicans had put their hopes in President Bush, and they were hoping that he would come back with a victory. The Democrats are going to nominate a new candidate from Arkansas, who was the governor of Arkansas, named Bill Clinton. Clinton is going to understand that the Democratic candidates had suffered in recent elections because voters perceived them as being tax and spend liberals. And because of this, he knew that he was going to fight an uphill battle trying to persuade voters to eventually pick him. One of the terms that he comes up with is something known as the New Democrat. And that's what he started referring to himself as, a New Democrat who was a moderate. He was in between a conservative and a liberal rather than being just liberal. What made the 92 election so different was the fact that it featured a formidable third-party candidate who was a Texas billionaire businessman, and his name was Ross Perot, and you can see him pictured here on this slide. Perot entered the race for president as an independent candidate, and because of discontent that many people felt with the federal government and the traditional two-party system, Perot is going to gain a great deal of support. And at one point, Perot was actually even with Clinton and Bush in the national, and was even with Clinton and Bush in the national polls. But Perot is going to drop out of the race, which proves to be a big mistake for him, even though he had some momentum at that point. Once leaving the race, it's just between Clinton and Bush. Perot is going to try to re-enter back into the race later on when his supporters tried to get him to come back in. But his campaign would never regain the momentum that it once had. In the end, Bill Clinton would win the election of 1992 with less than 50% of the popular vote. Okay, with Bill Clinton, the economy is going to see a huge upswing. Under Clinton, the nation is going to go from having a massive budget deficit, which means you spend more money than the government has in a given year, to a budget surplus, which means you have more money than you have in a given year. So the United States also is going to ratify a trade agreement, which is you're seeing playing out, has been playing out in the news recently, known as NAFTA. NAFTA stands for the North American Free Trade Agreement. NAFTA is going to promote free trade, which means no trade restrictions between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. But it's going to cause considerable controversy in the United States. Many labor unions feared that this agreement would encourage the U.S. businesses to relocate to Mexico, where they would face fewer restrictions and be able to pay lower wages. And in some cases, that did happen. Proponents of NAFTA, however, argued that it would create jobs in the United States by increasing foreign markets for U.S. businesses. And in some cases, that happened as well. Clinton's going to seek to also improve the United States healthcare system. He was disturbed that nearly 40 million U.S. citizens still had no medical insurance. Clinton's going to appoint his own wife, Hillary Clinton, to head a task force to analyze healthcare and propose reforms. Clinton ended up presenting to Congress a plan that called for a government-supervised health insurance program that guaranteed affordable health care coverage to every U.S. citizen. This plan was rejected, though, by Congress after roughly a year of debate. Many insurance and business interests had opposed the plan and did an effective job of lobbying and building political support against it. In addition to all of this, many conservatives felt that it was way too expensive and another example of tax and spend liberalism, which is what Bill Clinton ran against in his campaign, to try to fund government programs. Critics are also going to argue that government control would ultimately hurt the quality of health care in the United States, and they would point to other examples in other countries to support that claim. So again, Clinton's trying to do some things. Some of those things we're still dealing with today, and you can hear them in the news. But again, Clinton starts off trying to deal with health care, by issuing NAFTA, which becomes a major deal later on. And then, of course, dealing with a budget deficit. Probably one of his crowning achievements is going to be from turning that budget deficit into a budget surplus, something that we don't have today. So for that, Clinton gets a lot of credit and a lot of support because of him going from a budget deficit to a budget surplus. The Clinton administration is going to experience a setback during 1994 when the Republicans are going to win control of both the House and the Senate. Once they won control, a Georgia Republican representative named Newt Gingrich is going to take over. He's going to be a guy that's going to become nationally known for his contract with America. The contract was a pledge by the conservatives and the Republicans, for the most part, to scale back the role of government, so to limit government, to lower or cut taxes, and to help balance the budget. It helped propel the Republicans to victory in the 1994 congressional elections. So many of the Republicans are going to win. It's going to be one of the few times that the House and the Senate is going to be controlled by one single party. Gingrich, who's going to become the Speaker of the House due to the success of this contract with America. A huge showdown between Clinton and Gingrich, Republican-led Congress, occurred in 1995 over proposed budget cuts. When the two sides could not reach a compromise, the federal government was forced to temporarily shut down and cease services to millions of people. It was the spring of 1996 before the two sides finally reached an agreement. The budget battle turned out to be a plus for Clinton and a negative for the Republican-led Congress at that point. Clinton is going to gain in popularity due to the government shutdown that occurred during that period. In August of 1996, Clinton is going to sign into law a sweeping welfare reform, declaring it is the end of welfare as we know it. Clinton is going to place new restrictions on entitlement. Entitlements are special programs and benefits from the government, like welfare. He's going to scale back social spending as well. These reforms also are going to place limits on the amount of aid families could receive. And of course, you got a certain amount, and it required that most adults had to find work within 2 years of applying for aid. It's going to place more conditions on how you qualify for food stamps. And food stamps, if you don't know what those are vouchers from the government that can be used by low-income families to purchase food. The policy that he proposes with this welfare reform is going to boost his popularity just before the election. And because of these welfare reforms, he's going to be able to easily defeat the Republican candidate, Bob Dole, and another candidate, which would be Ross Perot again, running in a new political party known as the Reform Party. So Bill Clinton is going to win the election of 1996. Now, Bill Clinton's popularity was soaring after the sweeping welfare reform that he brought into place in the 1996 election. But Bill Clinton's going to have one problem. Well, he's going to have a few problems, and that's going to be scandal. Bill Clinton has always been acknowledged by many to have been a brilliant politician and a very effective president. His legacy, though, is going to be forever attached to scandals, which are going to dog him throughout his entire career, even to this day. The final scandal in Bill Clinton's presidency is going to occur in a bad way when a young woman named Paula Jones is going to accuse Clinton of sexual harassment before he had become president. Now, this happened before he became president, but the problem is that Paula Jones is actually going to drag in another young lady that you see pictured here named Monica Lewinsky. During this investigation of Paula Jones' allegations, officials asked Clinton about the nature of his relationship with a White House intern who was Monica Lewinsky. Under oath, he's going to say that he didn't know her, that he didn't have a relationship with her, and as more evidence is going to come to light, it's going to become apparent that Clinton really did. In August of 1998, Clinton went on national television and admitted having a relationship with Monica Lewinsky that was inappropriate. On December 19th, 1998, the House is going to vote to impeach Bill Clinton. He was only the second president in history to be impeached, the first being Andrew Johnson. Of course, Andrew Johnson coming after Abraham Lincoln, and we've talked about him and how he was his presidency was plagued with corruption. Nixon probably would have been impeached if he would have stayed and not resigned. So Clinton becomes only the second to be impeached. But Clinton's presidency would survive the impeachment. And of course, in order to be removed from office, the Senate had to vote to impeach him as well. And only the House voted to impeach Bill Clinton. The Senate did not vote to impeach him. And so Bill Clinton's presidency would continue when the Senate chooses not to impeach him. That's going to do it for this part one of 8.5 and 8.6. Please make sure that you follow through with your learning objective questions. Make sure that you have answered those, and we'll try to continue on with part two coming up next. While you're answering these learning objective questions, feel free to continue watching the video with Bill Clinton actually pledging that he did not have relations and going on national television. This is the actual clip from that press conference.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Terry Riley, Florida Community Learning Centers. I'm very proud of what we've done there. Now, I have to go back to work on my State of the Union speech, and I worked on it till pretty late last night. But I want to say one thing to the American people. I want you to listen to me. I'm going to say this again. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. I never told anybody to lie, not a single time, never. These allegations are false, and I need to go back to work for the American people. Thank you.